Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Pereira. US President Donald Trump approved fresh sanctions on Russia on Wednesday after Congress showed overwhelming bipartisan support for the new measures. Congress passed the bill last week in response to Russia's interference in the 2016 US election, as well as its human rights violations, annexation of Crimea and military operations in eastern Ukraine. The bill's passage drew ire from Moscow, which responded by stripping 755 staff members and 2 properties from US missions in the country, all but crushing any hope for the reset in US-Russian relations that Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin had called for. On this edition of The Big Picture, we'll take a closer look at the new sanctions and what they mean for US-Russia ties. Joining me on the program today are Meera, Shankar, former ambassador to the US and Germany; Abdul Nafey, Professor, Center for US and Latin American Studies, JNU; Mohan, Guruswamy, Senior Economist and Journalist; and Rajiv, Sikri, former Secretary, Ministry of External Affairs. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Ambassador Meera, Shankar, I'd like to begin with you. So what's in the bill, and have the wings of Donald Trump been clipped now? Because if he has to ease the sanctions, he needs congressional approval.
Yes, well, the bill imposes sanctions on Russia, in addition to the sanctions which were already imposed by the Obama administration for having interfered in the elections, in the presidential election in the US. And this covers, defense and the energy sector. So it expands the sanctions. And what is clearly a kind of a vote of limited confidence in the president, they have tied the president's hand in terms of how he wants to pursue the relationship with Russia. You know, this has been a point of major controversy in the United States because Trump, as a presidential candidate, was very upfront about his desire to improve relations with Russia. And there was a hope that relations with Russia might be reset. But because of the, controversy regarding alleged Russian meddling in the presidential elections, now that has become toxic in a sense. And Congress has tied the president's hands. But the president, while giving his assent to the bill, has also said that it is seriously flawed and that there are unconstitutional elements in it because the president needs flexibility while pursuing foreign policy, and Congress cannot override its authority to limit the authority of the president to conduct foreign policy. So there is some speculation as to how far Trump would enforce the sanctions that have been put in place, because some of those sanctions will also hit the US's allies. And he said that it might, he will see about, the sanctions, particularly as they relate to potential problems in the work that he's trying to do with European allies to resolve the issues in Ukraine. Now, the Europeans have complained because energy investment in Russia or anybody helping their energy sector or other sectors which are sanctioned could invite secondary sanctions. Which, where the US has had a tendency to assume extraterritorial authority. And this would, seriously hurt the Europeans, particularly those working on the northern stream, which really involves German companies which have been working at establishing that energy link with Russia. I don't know how it will affect us because we have some investments, whether it impacts ongoing investments or potential future investments. The president has the right to waive these secondary sanctions.
Indeed.
So we have to see how far this is implemented, but what it really does with the reaction from Russia is that the hopes of any improvement
of ties
in Russia-US relations certainly recede.
Okay, fair enough. You know, Professor Abdul, Nafey, could Donald Trump have done, you know, something as far as these sanctions are concerned? Do you believe that he's going to go through with these sanctions? What are the options on the table as far as Donald Trump are concerned?
You know, my take on this is a little different. Actually, President Trump was lobbying with the Congress almost for the past 6 weeks to soften these sanctions. The bill was in the process, and Trump was making every effort that executive powers to conduct foreign policy, let it not be so much restricted. At the same time, you know, second point is, it is a Republican dominated Congress. Actually, on this issue, there is lots of factionalism going on within the Republican Party itself. Trump could not have done anything better. Congress was determined to take making of foreign policy, especially related to Russia, away from the hands of the president. And for the next 3.5 years, it is Congress which will be shaping US relations with Russia. So we are going to see lots of bickering back and forth on this subject for the rest of the term of the president.
Okay. You know, Mohan Guruswamy, is this a setback really for Trump? Because he's been trying really hard, you know, speaking to Trump when they met at the G20 summit. They spoke about resetting ties, and they talked about coming closer together. Is this a setback in a sense?
It's a setback. It's a rebuke from the Republican Party in particular, because the Speaker, Paul Ryan, particularly took an initiative in getting this bill through. And but Trump today said something very interesting. I don't like it because I'm a businessman. It's going to hurt our business. And even Tillerson, Secretary of State, said it's not good, because Tillerson, till he became Secretary of State, was negotiating with the Russians for these big oil concessions for Exxon. So, and they know what the potential consequences of this would be. I don't think Congress really contemplated all those things. And there could also be a Russian reaction to it. Already there's talk of stopping titanium exports, uranium oxide. And today I heard a Russian spokesman say that, you know, oh, they can send their supplies to the space station on a horseback. You know, they need their launchers for it. So, you know, these things are going to go on. But Russia has been under some set of sanctions or the other. The defense sanction is only notional because there have always been defense embargoes on Russia technology, because the commercial competitors also, apart from being political competitors. So that really won't hurt them. Oil industry, the consumer also hurts just as badly. You know, prices might go up if Russian production drops, Arab production goes up. You know, so all these things are. So I don't think it's really going to knock Mr. Putin off his pedestal. Anything is going to strengthen him. And he's had this big military parade in St. Petersburg yesterday. I saw one parade. It was quite awesome. The new ships he brought out, new aircraft, you know, and he's flexing all his muscles. And then, you know, he's got money bags next to him on the other side, you know, who can pick up the slack. Financing can come from China, you know, a lot of that is already going on there. So I think, you know, this is somewhere the Americans will realize that it's not working. The first set of sanctions didn't work. This set on the oil industry may not work. So let's see what happens.
Sure. You know, Ambassador Sikri, as far as US-Russia ties are concerned, is this a setback for US-Russia ties, or do you believe that the Russians were prepared for this because they knew that this was going to happen?
It is definitely a setback. It's a very serious setback. And as has been pointed out, for the next 3.5 years, policy is out of Trump's hands and with the Congress. But it has far-reaching effects, because in order to bring Russian-US relations back to a more equitable state will require many, many years. It's a kind of a second Cold War which has begun, and it fouls the whole atmosphere. I think it has many other consequences which will unfold in the coming months and years. One, I think it will drive a wedge between US and Europe, and that's not good for the Atlantic alliance. Two, I think that Russia is going to turn up the heat on some European countries. particularly the vulnerable NATO allies like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. There's talk that the breakaway provinces of Donetsk and Luhansk may be declared an independent like Malorussia. And if the Americans do not react, it shows up the ineffectiveness of the Americans. And if they do, it's a crisis. So I think we can expect more tension in Europe. The second thing which, from our point of view, is very worrisome is that this would drive Russia closer to China.
Yes. And that's been happening.
It has been happening. This will happen even more now, I suppose. And that doesn't suit us given the state of India-China relations. So these are turbulent times ahead.
And Russia can look towards, potential Indian enemies like Pakistan as well, because they've signed a defense deal.
That is a separate thing. I think the thing which strikes me is that the Americans have realized once again that Russia is a formidable military power. They had downplayed the Russian capabilities after the breakup of the Soviet Union, but the revival of the Russian military, the modernization, and the way they have gone about testing their weapons, whether it is in Syria and so forth, have signaled, as Mohan just pointed out, these parades and so forth, they signaled that, look, we have the capabilities.
Sure.
Now, when Russia today is the only country which has the capability to physically threaten America, and that bothers America. You can see the American reaction to the North Korean development of an ICBM that can reach American shores. So they want to somehow neutralize Russia, but I think the way they are going about it is likely to be counterproductive, even for America itself, not to speak of the rest of the world.
Ambassador Shankar, sanctions against Russia have been there for a few years now, As far as the existing sanctions are concerned, have they really worked? Have they put Russia on the back foot?
Well, they've impacted Russia's economy because it also coincided with a, reduction in oil prices, and oil being the primary commodity for the Russian economy. The economy has not been in a very robust state since the sanctions were imposed. But the sanctions have also impacted those who imposed the sanctions, because Russia stopped buying, say, food and other things from Europe, began buying from other countries, and it pushed Russia much closer to China. Somehow there's this feeling in the West, they're quite sanguine that Russia-China relations cannot go beyond a point, and Russia has some inherent suspicions of China, which will limit the extent. But once you change the, you change the equilibrium, then that movement towards another direction, towards the east, can accelerate and acquire momentum of its own. So,
do you see that happening in the near future?
I do see that happening, and I also see that what this does is to, let America take the eye off the ball, and that is their main, their main rivalry, their main competition, if you will, is really from China in the long run, not from Russia, particularly economic, because economically Russia is not in a position right now to affect US interests. Yes, militarily Russia is strong, and it has shown the ability to thwart US policies in places like Syria. And it has also shown the ability to work with the US in places like Iran. And earlier, even in Afghanistan, where when Pakistan used to close the transit route for NATO, Russia allowed NATO to use the northern route through Russia for non-lethal supplies to Afghanistan.
Yes.
But the Russian position also seems to have changed in Afghanistan with the heating up of Russia-US tensions. They don't want to, be so helpful and then be taken for granted.
Sure, sure. Professor, we've spoken about the existing sanctions. What about the new sanctions now? What kind of an impact will they have on Russia? Will Russia even be bothered about these new set of sanctions?
No, it's like this. Sincerely, there is no theory of sanctions. Whether they are going to have an impact or not an impact, it all depends upon context. And North Korea has survived 64 years of sanctions. Cuba has survived roughly 70 years of sanctions, 60 years of sanctions. As far as Russia is concerned, sanctions, to my mind, are not going to hurt Russia. Rather, they are going to hurt more countries like Germany, which are really seeking Russian energy. Sanctions are going to equally hurt some of these Baltic states like Estonia and Latvia. You know, Russia, some of the Soviet era industries are still very strongly there. Now, Russia is going to substitute some of these manufacturing units. Rather than import goods from some of these states, they are going to become self-sufficient in that. So, sanctions are likely to hurt more some of these states which have recently joined NATO. Some of the European Union countries, especially countries like Germany, are going to be affected more. And as one of the panelists is saying, Russian flow, diplomatic, energy, economic, would increase towards the east with China. So, to some extent, that might offset the impact of sanctions.
Okay, sure. Mr. Guruswamy, you know, this point about Europe being affected by this new set of sanctions has been raised by several speakers on the debate today. What's your take on, you know, some of the European countries? Are they going to pressurize the United States into not imposing some of these sanctions because they're going to be badly hit by this?
I think President Trump himself will pressurize his government not to impose many of those sanctions, because the sanctions voted by Congress is actually a rebuke for him.
Sure.
He didn't want it, and he tried to explain. I think business costs to the US are going to be considerable. Russia might hit back by saying no beef exports, no beef imports, no chicken leg. These are big American exports. They fight to open those markets up for themselves.
But is Russia in a position to do that because their economy is already hit?
No, their economy is hit by what? Oil prices are now creeping up. They've got used to the new level, and they're producing more, and they're producing more. Exports have gone up. Industrial exports have gone up. Primary, there are some things you depend on Russia. You know, you want diamonds, you depend on Russia. You want gold, you depend on Russia. So, you know, these things are not going to go down. And a big country, big economy is not really going to disappear. So, it's going to survive, and survive quite easily. Actually, Putin's hand becomes very strong within Russia. So, it won't really affect anybody in the long run. The Americans will give up after, like, you know, the money sanctions on Russia, Putin's kids. And did it affect anybody? Those guys just moved the money to Switzerland and other havens, you know. So, oil, capital. There's no great technology which only comes from America. And defense, of course, is all closed. So, they'll get the technology from somewhere else if they need. After all, they had a complete, big, giant oil industry. It's the world's biggest oil reserves. Giant oil industry of their own. So, to say that, you know, Santa Fe company cannot come, therefore, you know, you won't be able to drill is nonsense. They'll find some way of drilling and going down. So, you know, I don't think it's going to hurt. Americans are going to get singed in the bargain, and at some stage, just slowly forget about this.
Okay. You know, Ambassador Sikri, as far as Trump and Putin are concerned, do you believe that at some point in time they're going to try and collaborate? They're going to try and, you know, come together again to try and, you know, mend ways and mend ties between the two countries?
I don't think it's any longer a question of a personal equation. It's way beyond that. Both Trump and Putin have to work within the limitations of the system. So I wouldn't really put too much hope on Trump and Putin trying to do something. You know, Trump had said before the election that he was going to try and reset relations with Russia, and he took a number of steps through his family members and directly and so forth to establish a thing. But the mood in the US Congress and Senate is so anti-Russian that Trump has been defeated. So it's a great political defeat for Trump.
So it's going to be an uphill task then for him, the remainder of his presidency.
Definitely. I mean, apart from his other problems, he's firing every week a few people from his own administration. Senior officials have not even been nominated, much less confirmed by the Senate. So how he's not running the show. I mean, all he's doing is a tweet every day in the middle of the night, which he changes the next day, and now he's battling his own party. So I think it's a very dysfunctional America that we are seeing now. There's so much infighting going on, and it's all out in the open. I frankly don't see how this can continue endlessly.
Sure.
Congress has sanctioned Trump.
You know, Prime Minister Medvedev has called this almost a full-scale trade war.
Yes, that's what he's called it.
And
you know, that brings me to my next question.
They've also used the word that, you know, Trump is powerless.
Yes.
So they see that his ability to take initiatives vis-a-vis Russia are highly circumscribed.
So what are Moscow's options now, Ambassador? Then you know what does Russia really want going forward?
Well, they want to be respected. They are prepared to work, I think, with the US in various areas, but they also want their core interests to be respected. Let's see how it progresses. Clearly, you know, Russia has shown that it has the ability to import from other sources. If imports from the West are choked, they've imported agricultural commodities from Turkey, from other countries, and that will expand. And China's role in Russia, as it is, they are importing a lot of things from China. The gas pipeline has gone through. So you're going to see that economically, Russia, which had always desired actually to become part of Europe, will now emphasize its Asian avatar at the cost of Europe.
Sure. You know, I'm going to get closing comments from my other guests as well, beginning with you, Nafey. You know, the way forward really, as far as Indo-US ties are concerned. I beg your pardon, Russia-US ties are concerned.
For another 3.5 years, we are going to see this stalemate. You know, problem with the American Congress is this. Congress has taken charge of relations with Russia. Congress is not a monolithic thing. Policy ideas, options are never processed the way they are processed in the White House and in the Department of State. American Congress is full of interest and tendencies, and all work at conflicting purposes. This kind of a back and forth will continue in the Congress. What I see now is, you know, there is a word called flavor of the time. Actually, maybe Congress has trapped itself by going swiftly into these large and heavy sanctions. These sanctions, to my mind, are not sustainable.
Okay, the sanctions are not sustainable is what you're saying.
Countries are going to find ways and means to skirt these sanctions, including the European Union members.
Okay, sure. Mr. Guruswamy, your closing remarks on the program.
You know, when I was studying American presidency a long time ago, my professor, Richard Newstead, who is an expert on the presidency, used to say, US actually has 4 presidents. President of IBM, president of US Steel, president of General Motors. And I said, and what about the man in the White House? He says, he's the guy who talks to Colonel Gaddafi. So that relationship has now changing, you know. They might have to find another president to talk to Colonel. And I think the way I'm seeing Trump going, you know, the entire American establishment, the Eastern establishment, is lining him up for a kill.
Okay.
So, you know, I don't see him surviving this term. I suspect that it's possible. So let's see what happens.
Okay, fair enough. And Ambassador Sikri, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
Well, I'd just like to offer a few thoughts on what it might mean for India. I think the Russians will probably have a little more interest in India in the oil and gas sector now. They've already been showing interest. Among other things, they have proposed that there should be a shallow water pipeline via Iran. So you will see now a new axis emerging of Russia, China, Iran, and they will try and get closer to Pakistan and Afghanistan, that kind of thing. And India has to be part of that game. We cannot be left out of that. So I think we need to devote a little more attention to our relations with Russia at this time, because the efforts that what we've done with the Americans is good. I think it's yielded benefits, but now I really don't see any coherent American policy. And I think it is time for India to focus a little more on Russia and see how we take our relationship forward. At this time, it's a critical time for Russia. Russia has stood by India in difficult times. I think Russia will also be watching to see what we do in this hour of difficulty for them.
All right, on that note, then we'll have to call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. I'd like to thank my guests, Meera, Shankar, Abdul, Nafey, Mohan, Guruswamy and Rajiv, Sikri for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's all the time we have today. See you again next time.